So a few weeks ago, my eldest daughter said, "What would you grow, Dad, if you could only grow 10 things?" And it kind of stumped me a bit because, I grow 200 different things and I love most of them. So I've been struggling really over the last few weeks trying to answer that question. And obviously the first thing I had to do was come up with some sort of criteria. So the criteria I always generally use when I'm asked this sort of question is, the things I choose have to be really prolific. They have to be really healthy. They have to provide a really nice continuous crop over a really long period of time. They need to work well together, so they need to kind of work in succession to provide a continuous year-round harvest. They need to be really expensive in the shops or something that you just can't buy. They need to be really tasty. So all these things kind of like, what's the perfect mix of things to grow? And yeah, it was a pretty difficult challenge for me. Anyway, I've come up with a list, and not just a list, I've kind of come up with a list and a kind of an example planting plan. And because it's me, and you always know I can never stick to 10 of anything, I have kind of come up with a few of my favourite interplants. And then I've kind of answered the question, well, what if I had 15? So let's take a look. So the other thing I did was try to restrict myself to things that grow outside, because as soon as you start adding things inside, then that's a little bit a whole different list basically. But this is my grow outside, no protection, maybe a little bit of fleece early on in the season, yeah, it's quite a list. So I've created a view onto my varieties database, and you can find that view linked in the description below, and you can scroll through it, and if you tap on any of the entries, then you'll get more details of the variety and the rationale for why I've added it to my top 10 list. So I'm going to start with kalettes. Now, kalettes are one of my all-time favourite things just generally, but I love them because of the really long harvest period, which kind of runs from sort of July time, when you can harvest the leaves, to maybe sort of October, November time, when you can take the tops, and they're like a little cabbage, and then you get the actual flower sprouts on this stem, just like a Brussels sprout. And then in spring, you get another flush of leaves. So it's an incredibly long harvest period, but it's really tasty, it's really healthy, and it's less susceptible to pests as well than most of the brassicas. So we really love it, and obviously the nature of it, that really long continuous harvest, really makes it one of those perfect things when you can only grow 1 or 2 brassicas on your list. So next up is actually stir-on. Now, we love spring onions, and so we've got stir-on on this list as a spring onion, but the real benefit of it is that it also grows into a really nice bulbing onion. So you can start it off about now in August, masses of it, and harvest that all the way through late winter and early spring. And by mid-spring, they're getting quite big, so you can chop them up for cooking. And then late spring and into early summer, you can harvest it as bulbs for storage. So I really love it. If it was one onion that I had to grow, it would be stir-on. So next up are the runner beans. Now, I actually prefer French beans, but if I had to just pick one bean, it would be a runner bean. I'm not particularly bothered about the variety here, Scarlet Empire, just the one that I happen to grow. And I really like it, again, because it's got such a long harvest period. And that makes all the difference by comparison with the French bean, for example, which has a shorter harvest period and is not quite so prolific. So if I had to just grow one bean, it would be a runner bean. So next up is the brassica that I've chosen to fill the gap between the kalettes finishing and the kalettes starting again in sort of late July, August, when you can harvest them for leaves. And I've chosen fill basket Brussels sprouts grown for the leaves. I'd love, again, as I said, something that gives you a really long continuous harvest period. And Brussels sprouts, I think, do that, as well as being an incredibly tasty leaf, much better to our taste than spring cabbage, for example. So we would plant those sort of September, October time, or February time. If you do them September, October, you overwinter them in a greenhouse. If you do them in February, obviously you can just grow them as normal. Plant them out early as you can, sort of March, under fleece, really close together, loads of plants. So between 18 and 27 plants in a square metre. So way more, 5 times more than you would normally do sprouts. And the result is an absolutely massive profusion of incredibly tasty leaves, fairly small leaves as well, which is obviously what you want. Now then, by the time you get to about June time, June, July, you'll see a few of those plants aren't thriving. Cut those off and let the remaining ones grow on. By about July, early July, they'll have formed sprout tops, which are like a little cabbage. Cut those off and eat those, and they're just the most delicious, tender leaves. And so you've basically had this amazing leaf crop, then you get this like a little cabbage crop, and then once you've taken the tops off, that stimulates the actual Brussels sprouts to form on the stem, and so then you get a sprout crop. And then by about August time, about now, just as the kalettes are really giving a massive profusion of leaf growth, then you can pull them up and plant something else. So next up is New Zealand spinach. Now this is really the only, if I was to grow one spinach over summer, this would be the one that I would grow. It's fantastic. It gives a harvest from about June all the way through towards the end of September. The quality does decline a little bit in late August, September time, but it's still an amazing spinach. And again, if I was to only grow one, that would be the one. It's fantastic. And it's just incredibly prolific. Everything on this list is prolific, healthy, long season, etc., etc. The beauty of New Zealand spinach is it doesn't bolt in summer. So you get one succession, started in sort of late April time in modules, planted out after the risk of frost has passed, so maybe 10th of May or something like that. Just one succession for all that period. So next up on my list is Taunton Dean perennial kale. Now this is a alternative, really, in a way, to the kalettes and the Brussels sprouts that I'm growing for leaves. If you wanted just one brassica for the whole year, it would be Taunton Dean kale. Now personally, I don't think it tastes quite as good as kalettes. I don't think it tastes quite as good as sprout leaves and sprouts. So it's not as versatile as the two of those combined. But if you only had space for one, and maybe only one or two plants, Taunton Dean kale would be the one to go. Now actually, I provide for free Taunton Dean cuttings to anybody who's a member of my channel and supports me via the Buy Me a Coffee site. But if you can't afford that, then I also send them out for free. You just have to send me an email and request a free membership. But that's only for people who can afford it. So next up on my list would be green garlic. So I think it's just an amazing crop. I can't remember the actual figures, but I think the yield is something like 10-20 times as much as bulb garlic. But it has so many of the same advantages. It's just as healthy. You can freeze it and use it in cooking all year round. But because you're eating the whole of the stem, as well as the monobulb at the bottom, green garlic is just so much more prolific than bulb garlic, and it tastes just as nice. The stem's a little bit milder, so we use that really more like a garlicky leek. And so just think of what you're getting. You're getting the garlic bulb and you're getting this garlicky leek, and you're planting it at a really high density, so maybe 3 or 4 times the density that you would bulb garlic. So you're getting a huge yield by comparison. And you're not really losing out, provided you can freeze it. So if I were to grow just one thing, it would be green garlic. Now, green garlic is just ordinary garlic. it's just harvested in May and June rather than July. And that means that if you planted it and just left maybe a quarter of the bulbs to grow on into mature garlic, then you'd also get a storage garlic crop as well. So a double benefit there, but of course it would take up the space for a little bit longer. And we're on to lettuce. Now, I love my salads. I have a salad every day, and if I were to choose just one salad for the whole of the year, it would be Grenoble Red. It's a fantastic salad. I get mine from Seeds of Italy. You get a huge packet with a vast number of seeds in it, so it'll last you for 4 or 5 years probably. The seeds last really long. I'm still using my original packet from 5 years ago, and it's doing great. I'll probably switch over to a new one fairly soon. And the beauty of it is it's a fantastic lettuce in spring, autumn and winter, and it's a reasonable lettuce in summer, so you really can't beat that. It works so well as a cut and come again lettuce. It's really crisp, and it's also really healthy. You can see in this picture just a little bit of red tinging on there, and that red really adds to the health benefits. It's a fantastic lettuce. It's not even bothered too much by slugs and snails, although I'm not promising. So we really like chard, but chard doesn't make it onto this list. Chard's really healthy, it's really prolific, it's really difficult to get in the shops, etc, etc. So all the benefits that I like. But I would grow beetroot. Now you could choose between golden beetroot and red beetroot. I choose golden beetroot for this because it works really well as a carrot substitute, and I can't get carrots onto this list because they're not as prolific. They don't store as well. They're more difficult to grow as well. They suffer from more pests. Golden beetroot is just fantastic. The leaves on it are brilliant. They're just as good as chard. You can't harvest quite as many, but you can harvest 1 or 2 leaves per plant every few weeks, and you'll still get a decent root on them. They, as I said, they're mild tasting, so everybody likes them. Lots of people who don't like red beetroot still like golden beetroot. As I said, you can use it like a carrot. It stores incredibly well. It's really prolific. You can harvest it over a long period of time, just multi-sow it and take the biggest one, leave the next one, then 2 weeks later harvest the next biggest one, 2 weeks later harvest the next biggest one, sort of thing. So you get a harvest over a nice long period, probably 6 to 8 weeks. Absolutely fantastic. So we come on to field beans. Now, field beans are again one of my favourite crops to grow. Not for the beans, although you can leave them to grow for the beans, but for the growing tips that you harvest in autumn, a few in winter, and then loads and loads in spring. And these are a spinach substitute. Some people have them in salads. Loads of people cook with them. Everybody loves them. And they're just an amazing crop. But the beauty of them is not only are they this incredibly prolific crop that you get really early and really late in the season, but they're also adding nutrients, nitrogen, into the ground for the brassica crop, which is what I normally follow them with. So I normally do field beans, then kalettes, and that's my favourite succession. And yeah, they're just an amazing crop, harvested for the growing tips, not the leaves, the growing tips, which are like a little tight bunch of leaves, super tender, and the quality of them, even in winter, is really great. But I am adding a true spinach, because true spinach is just so incredibly healthy, incredibly prolific. You can buy it in the shops, but it is a real money saver if you like spinach. And the variety that we grow is Giant Winter because it's just so good over winter. Remember, I'm not growing spinach, true spinach, in summer. I'm growing New Zealand spinach. So Giant Winter is the best one we found for winter. And yeah, it's just fantastic. Give it a bit of protection if you can. We like to grow ours in cold frames, which means we get a continuous harvest all the way through winter probably, I don't know, 10 times as much harvested over winter as if we'd grown it without any protection. And then my tomato, if I were to only grow one tomato, it would be tumbler. It grows incredibly well outside. It gives a huge yield, probably not quite the yield that it's showing on that photo there, but a really great yield. Grow it in a nice big container or a big hanging basket, and it's just great. It's one of the earliest tomatoes, one of the most prolific, really high on the taste test. Yeah, it's just such a great tomato, and of course it doesn't need any attention. You just plant it out, give it a bit of protection for the first few weeks, and then just leave it to it. It trails. You don't need to prune it. You don't need to support it. You don't need to do anything other than harvest. The harvest period isn't the longest harvest period, but it's so prolific that you get plenty for making sauces and things like that. Now, I also love peas, and I would always pick a sugar snap or a mange tout pea. If I were to pick only one, I think I'd now go for a sugar snap pea, because you can harvest them and eat them like a mange tout when they're young. Then you can eat the whole pod, obviously, and the pea as a sugar snap. And then if you pick the right variety, you can pod them and eat the individual peas as well, so when they're a bit more mature. So I think they're just such a fantastic taste of summer in spring, and yeah, you just can't beat them. So then I come on to lamb's lettuce. Now again, this is just a fantastic winter crop. It wouldn't make the list but for the fact it's one of the few things that few salads that actually are in great condition in January and February. And so if you want a sort of some salad all the way through the year, then lamb's lettuce is just this great winter, depths of winter salad. And it's still really tender, it's still really tasty. The leaves are in really great condition at that most difficult time of year. For the rest of the year, eat your Grenoble red, but in January and February, give the Grenoble red a bit of a rest and pick lamb's lettuce. And because it's growing outside, everybody's always got space outside in winter. So lamb's lettuce earns its spot. So I think that's my 10. It might have been 11, I don't know. But I think that's it. And I'm on to now my interplants. So if I were to grow a few more things to interplant into the bed, so they don't need any more space, it's just when you plant your kalettes, there's loads of space. Bung some radishes in, bung some Tokyo cross turnips in. In the autumn, you know, again, got a bit of space, bung some radishes in, bung some turnips in. There's always little gaps in your growing space whilst plants are maturing to get this bonus crop, and we always choose for the bonus crop French breakfast radish and Tokyo cross turnips. And then we're on to, well, what if I had a few more things to grow? My 15, I think. And here I'd pick the berries. So there's all sorts of different strawberries. I just picked a random variety here. Fenella, but Alsanta is also a great one. I would definitely grow strawberries. They're not the most prolific, but you can interplant garlic into your strawberry bed as well, so you get a double crop out of the same space. Yeah, strawberries are fantastic. Raspberries, again, they take up almost no space. Grow them against a wall or a fence or something like that. I like the summer fruiting varieties myself a little bit more, but again, they're just so fantastic, so healthy, so prolific, so tasty. And then blueberries, I would definitely grow blueberries. Pick a few, 2 or 3 different varieties, and you'll be harvesting them for like a 2-month period, and they're just absolutely fantastic and a wonderful complement to strawberries and raspberries. And then the final one on my list will be an apple that you can't buy. I call it Dave because it comes off Dave's plot, and I've got some cuttings that I'm growing myself, and it's just the most amazing apple. And I'm sorry I can't give you a variety name, but you know, any apple is, you know, probably good, but this particular apple, it gets no grubs. It's the most crisp and fresh tasting apple I've ever tried, and it stores incredibly well. So you're picking it sort of October time, November time, and it stores all the way through until April. I just wish, I dream about having this apple on my plot, but Dave lets me have a few, and as I said, he's let me have some cuttings as well. So one day I'll have my own supply. But that is my list. And so now what I want to do is just show you how I would plant them. Okay, so we'll start over on the left hand side, and basically the idea of this planting plan is that the columns are an individual bed and the rows are a season. So this top left hand corner is the first bed and it's winter. So this bed starts with kalettes, and then we switch to New Zealand spinach, and then when the New Zealand spinach finishes in autumn, we plant field beans and they enrich the ground ready for brassicas the following year. So in the second bed we've got lettuce over winter, and then when the lettuce finishes in spring, mid-spring, then we've got golden beetroot, could be any beetroot, and when that beetroot finishes in autumn, then we plant giant winter spinach to go all the way through winter and into spring. And then in winter here we start with lamb's lettuce. Lamb's lettuce finishes sort of mid-February, very early March. So then we plant early Brussels, very high density for a leaf crop in the Hungry Gap, sort of May-June sort of time scale. And then we keep on harvesting those all the way through until about August, and then we plant lettuce, and again that goes through autumn and into winter. And the next one, we've got spinach over winter and into early spring. Then we plant peas, they take us all the way through summer, and then in about July, early August sort of time, we plant beetroot, and we leave that in the ground and harvest that through until early winter. And then the next one, we've got green garlic, although we could interplant green garlic all over the place if we wanted to, but we've got some dedicated beds of green garlic here. For example, this could be planted perhaps one clove every 2 inches or something like that each way, and then we progressively harvest that in spring, and we finish that harvest at about June, which is when we plant out our outdoor tumbler tomatoes. They go all the way through summer, and then in probably about September time, maybe even October, that's when we plant out our lamb's lettuce. So the next one we've got is field beans. They were planted back in sort of October, November time, but here we're showing them starting in winter, harvest them through winter and into spring, and about May, that's when we plant the kalettes, and they stay in the bed all the way through the rest of the year and actually into the next spring. And then finally we've got these stir on, planted initially at spring onion density, so really high density, back in September, October time, and then they grow all the way through, and then we start harvesting them sort of February time, and then we harvest them all the way through into May, and by then they're cooking onions, and then you can leave them in the ground a little bit longer. So maybe 2/3 of the bed you leave as onions. You've harvested them now, so they're now at main crop onion density, 1 every 4 inches or something like that. 2/3 of the bed onions, and then just 1/3 of the bed you plant with your beans, and then your beans go all the way through until sort of October time, when you could plant onions again. So that's a nice example of a sample planting plan. As I said, there's all sorts of different options there. I've taken the same planting plan and then I've just added in examples of where you could do additional interplanting. So you could put more green garlic in, you could put more spring onions in, and of course all over the place on here you could put radishes and turnips and things like that. So loads of opportunity to get a really rich diet all the way through the year. And so obviously you just look across horizontally and you see the selection of things that you'll be eating in that season. So I've updated my little ebook with the section now, sample planting plans. And if you scroll down, the first one on the list is the one that this video is all about, the small self-sufficient garden plan. And this gives you all the background to the video, and also the live view onto the database. So if you're interested in any of the particular varieties, you can take a look at those, and there's more details when you click on the expanded record. And then we've got the actual planting plan itself, more details about successional planning, interplanting, and then I just go through the varieties and all that sort of thing. And then you've got the gallery view that I've just been using for the video. And again, when you click on these, you get access to more details. So I hope you liked this quick video, and what would you add to the list or subtract from it maybe? My name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.